This is the most optimal Nefer rotation ever created for her strongest baseline team.
By the frost moon of old, receive my blessing. A moonlit night for all. Sir, Animal Tech 63 awaits!
It all adds up. It all falls into place. The mystery unravels.
With one heart, we pray.
After months of pre-release and post-release rotation crafting, testing, and optimization, theory crafters have figured out the best Nefer rotation which maximizes buff uptime and utilizes all the verdant dews within the shortest possible rotation time for the most amount of damage. So in this video, I will go over how Nefer's best rotation works and exactly how to perform it yourself. Many people contributed to this work, but a special shout out to S and Drizzle for a lot of the rotation crafting, and the YouTube channel Genshin Suffering for both contributing to the TC and recording how these rotations should look in practice on video, which I will directly reference in this guide. Links to them will all be in the description below. The one important animation cancel you need to know on Nefer for all of her optimal rotations is her special charged attack cancel. Nefer's special charged attack, which costs 1 verdant dew and is accessible after pressing her skill to enter her enhanced state, consists of 2 attacks from Nefer and 3 attacks from her shades. In the full animation of her special charged attack, you have Nefer doing her initial leg sweep, then she jumps into the air while spawning her shades, then Nefer slams onto the ground while the shades execute their final attack. The 2 attacks from Nefer deal regular dendro damage, indicated with the dark green text, while the 3 attacks from the shades are direct lunar bloom damage, which is indicated by the light green text and is the more significant portion of her damage. Now you can just hold down the attack button and Nefer will do her full charged attack one after another. However, you can cancel the animation of this early to perform all her charge attacks more quickly. After Nefer's first initial leg sweep, you can dash to cancel the rest of the animation, then start doing the next charge attack immediately after. You can see here that even with the animation cancel, the shades will still spawn, so they will still do the 3 hits of lunar bloom damage. You can also do this cancel by using Nefer's burst at around the same time. You do lose Nefer's second hit from her final slam attack by animation canceling, but because this is just regular dendro damage and you still get all the lunar bloom damage from the shades, which is much more important, it is optimal to animation cancel on Nefer to do everything faster. If I just hold down the attack button for all 6 of Nefer's charge attacks, they finish after around 10 to 11 seconds, but if I dash cancel all of them, I finish after around 7 to 8 seconds, and shorter rotation time translates to higher DPS. The only time where animation canceling Nefer's charge attacks is somewhat detrimental is if you have her C6, which requires Nefer's second slam attack for extra lunar bloom damage. But even then, speedrunning will still often do the animation cancel. So aside from the C6 caveat, it is always optimal to animation cancel on Nefer. The better you do it, the shorter your rotations can be. With the main technical foundation for Nefer covered, let's delve into Nefer's most optimal rotation for her highest damaging team. Obviously, Llama and Columbina are on the team, as Llama is Nefer's dedicated support who massively buffs her lunar bloom damage, and Columbina provides additional buffs, off-field lunar bloom damage, and most importantly, enables extra dews for the team to use. The last support slot is where there's generally variability depending on what you want, but the highest damaging support option at a baseline level is Sucrose. C1 Sucrose is required for the rotation. Although sustainless without Llama's C1, Sucrose is the best for damage because her A4 passive allows her to give an elemental mastery buff to the team based on her EM whenever her skill or burst hits an enemy, and she gives further EM by using 4-piece instructors. The buff from this artifact set requires her to swirl Hydro to activate, which can be tight with the amount of dendro application on the team. But by doing Nefer's optimal rotation with Sucrose well, you'll be able to consistently get it and get damage performance that will be significantly better than C0 Nahida and can be on par with even C2 Nahida. The full optimal rotation with the Sucrose team, starting with all elemental bursts up and at least 3 verdant dews, is this. Start with Llama burst, then her hold skill to consume 3 dews and get the max amount of lunar bloom quill buffs. Swap to Columbina and use her burst and skill, then immediately swap to Sucrose and use her skill to swirl Hydro, dash after her skill for an animation cancel and use her burst. Then swap to Nefer, do her combo of 6 enhanced charge attacks with animation cancels, using her burst after her 6th charge attack, then ending the rotation with a Columbina charge attack, or 1 normal attack into a charge attack. You won't have enough energy recharge to use Nefer's and Sucrose's burst every rotation, so in rotations where they aren't up yet, the rotation is fairly similar. But instead of using Sucrose's skill and burst before Nefer, you just use her skill. Instead of canceling Nefer's 6th charge attack with her burst, you just do a normal dash cancel. And lastly, without the use of Sucrose's burst earlier, you want to swap to Sucrose after Nefer's field time and use her skill to refresh her A4 EM buff before doing Columbina's charge attack to end the rotation. You don't swirl any element here, you just want to refresh her A4 buff, which just requires hitting hitting an enemy. You will generally burst every other rotation on both Nefer and Sucrose, so assuming you start with your burst, you would just do the burst rotation, then the non-burst rotation, and then alternate between the two. This rotation does the following. It allows Sucrose to swirl Hydro once every rotation for 4-piece instructors, buffs all of Nefer's, Columbina's, and Llama's damage with Sucrose, maximizes Verdant Dew usage by using a Columbina charge attack that gets buffed by Llama's burst quills, has 0 downtime, and if done correctly, does everything within around 17.5 seconds without requiring any rotation extension. Now let's go through the rotation slowly and in more detail with some important tips on how to do it correctly. Now first, the rotation starts off with Llama's burst, of course, and then use her hold skill. You always want to use hold skill with Columbina and Nefer on the team because you want to consume the maximum of 3 dews to ensure that you generate the max amount of quill buffs from Llama's burst to buff both Nefer's and Columbina's Lunar Bloom damage, and with Columbina's burst providing extra verdant dews, you have enough dews to do this. Now there's a minor optimization here to ensure that you use Llama's hold skill immediately after her burst, so her hold skill can be buffered during her burst animation. Once Llama's orb here starts to leave her hand, you can start inputting the hold skill button and she will immediately use it afterwards. Now the next step is to use Columbina's abilities, then have Sucrose swirl Hydro. However, with Llama's off-field Dendro, it can be difficult to do this correctly. Fortunately, there are several key tips that will help you swirl Hydro on Sucrose consistently. First, after you use hold skill on Llama, wait to see when her deer from her skill jumps from the right and lands on the enemy. So let me just unpause it here. You can see, boom, the deer from the right just landed on the enemy. Again, I'm going to show it again. So hold skill. Boom. At the specific timing, you want to swap to Columbina and instantly use her burst. Because Columbina's burst applies 2U of Hydro, it will clear any Dendro on the enemy, which is why you want to use it immediately after Llama's skill hits, which is after the deer lands on the enemy. If you have high ping, then instead of swapping and bursting on Columbina once the deer lands on the ground, you can time it for before the deer lands on the ground. But to reiterate, the standard procedure is that once you see this deer land on the enemy, you instantly swap to Columbina and use her burst. Now after that, you use Columbina's skill and apply Hydro on the enemy. Then, you want to spam the swap button to Sucrose immediately. This will animation cancel her skill cast, allowing you to swap to Sucrose quicker to make swirling Hydro with her skill easier. So again, Columbina burst, then skill, then after the skill, you instantly swap to Sucrose. Just spam the button, and then once you get onto Sucrose, you want to immediately use her skill because her skill, dash, and the Q can be done very quickly itself. Assuming you are quick, there is no need for any Sucrose normal attacks or Columbina normal attacks. You just need to make sure that you hit this timing right. So again, Columbina burst, right? Once the deer hits on Llama, then you press Columbina's skill, then instantly swap to Sucrose and press her skill. You have to do this fast, and then you can see that the skill here is going to swirl. You see that swirl? You see that swirl right here? Swirl, okay? Then instantly dash and press her burst because you can do that quickly. Then afterwards, it's just the standard Nefer combo with dash cancels. As some general advice, you want to do them as fast as possible without canceling too quick to the point where you don't actually perform the charge attack at all. You can do it after Nefer's first leg swipe, but to do it quick and consistently, it ultimately just takes practice. Now lastly, we fit one Columbina charge attack right here, or one normal attack into a charge attack. The charge attack isn't that important of an optimization, so you can technically skip it and it's fine, especially if the previous parts of the rotation you performed were slower than optimal. Columbina's charge attack only does decent damage if it gets buffed by Llama's burst quills, indicated by the Frost Moon Scion buff icon above your HP bar. It can be difficult to get it buffed in time, especially in the Nefer burst rotation, so if you're struggling to get it buffed, you can choose to skip the charge attack or just do a normal attack for an extra fat proc to make the rotation easier. But for those of you that want to optimize, the charge attack on Columbina here is just to fit in free damage within the quick rotation to fill in dead time. For further minor optimization, you can swap cancel Columbina's charge attack before any of the hits actually land on an enemy. Also, doing N1C here is a little tighter on timing than just using her charge attack, but adding the extra normal attack is mainly for allowing Columbina an additional chance to proc Favonius Codex if she's using it. Now after you do the rotation with all the bursts, then you move on to the rotation where you generally won't have Nefer's or Sucrose's burst, but it's pretty much basically the same thing. So after the Columbina charge attack, Llama burst into hold skill, wait for the deer timing here, boom, swap to Columbina, burst, skill, instantly swap to Sucrose, press her skill, you're gonna get that swirl right here, swirl, so you proc 4-piece instructors here. Then you don't have Sucrose's burst, so instead of using a burst, you just swap to Nefer and do her standard charge attack stuff. So charge attack, skill again, charge attack dash, and then you don't have burst here to cancel the last charge attack, so you just do a regular charge attack dash cancel with Nefer. Then without Sucrose's burst active and hitting the enemy, her A4 is not going to be refreshed by her burst. So because you didn't use Sucrose's burst, in order to refresh her A4 buff, you simply just swap to Sucrose and use her skill. Remember, her A4 buff doesn't require you to swirl anything, so you just press Sucrose's skill after Nefer's on-field time to refresh the buff when you don't use her burst earlier. Otherwise, yeah, it's the same thing. You swap to Columbina, charge attack, and then you alternate to the rotation where you have your burst. So you just keep alternating between the rotation where you have Nefer's and Sucrose's burst and the rotation without it, and just keep alternating between the two. Now, if in the non-Nefer burst rotation you are struggling to get Columbina's charge attack buffed by Llama's burst quills, you can swap the order of Columbina and Sucrose after Nefer's on-field time. So Columbina charge attack first, then Sucrose's skill, instead of Sucrose's skill, then Columbina charge attack. That's how you do Nefer's most optimal rotation in her highest damaging team. Optimizing rotations is most important for Stygian Onslaught, the hardest endgame content in Genshin. But in Stygian, you don't start with any energy, so how does the optimal rotation look with this? Here's a good example on how to efficiently start the rotation in a Stygian environment done by Genshin Suffering. Now you can start with Nefer's skill and then swap to Llama and use her skill and funnel the dendro particles into her. This rotation video doesn't show that, it just starts with Llama's skill, but you can just add the Nefer skill right beforehand. Then, after Llama's skill, you swap to Columbina, use her skill, one normal attack, and do a regular charge attack that doesn't consume any verdant dues, and this is done to remove any dendro on the enemy, apply hydro, then swap to Sucrose, use her skill, and you get a swirl right here to proc 4-piece instructors. And then afterwards you just do one set of charge attacks on Nefer, so just 3 charge attacks, and that gets buffed. Now from personal experience, I tried doing this N1C timing to get Hydro onto the enemy and get the swirl, but it's actually pretty difficult, so just be aware. Now after the first set of Nefer charge attacks on the first rotation, you kind of just do some normal attacks on Columbina and proc Fab again, and then hopefully by this time, you have enough energy on all your supports to start your regular rotation. So you can just see here, you just start with Llama's burst, into a hold skill, wait for the deer to hit, instantly swap to Columbina and burst. Then use your skill, instantly swap to Sucrose, press her skill, you get the swirl here, Hydro Swirl, get the 4-piece instructors proc, and then you go onto Nefer and do her standard combo. Now for Stygian setups, there can be scenarios where you have Nefer's burst up but Sucrose's burst is not up. You don't have to wait for both of them to be up and use them at the same time. You can and should just prioritize using Nefer's burst if it's up, and then you can just use Sucrose's burst when it's available. Now if you have C1 Columbina, which gives her an additional lunar attack after casting her skill, the standard optimal rotation slightly changes. With Columbina's extra lunar attack that can get buffed by Llama's quills, her skill can perform the same role as the charge attack after Nefer's on-field combo. So with C1 Columbina, you can start the rotation off with her elemental skill, then instead of fitting her charge attack at the end, you can use her skill instead for a smoother rotation. This does mean that in order to set up the Hydro Swirl from Sucrose, instead of Columbina burst and skill after Llama, you will do Columbina burst and then one normal attack instead. The timing and swapping tips going from Llama to Columbina to Sucrose to set up the Hydro Swirl are the exact same. If you're having trouble getting Columbina's skill buffed by Llama's burst quills after Nefer's on-field time, you can just do the standard Sucrose rotation I've already went over to use up all the quills early, and it's still perfectly fine with C1 Columbina. In this scenario, adding Columbina's charge attack at the end of the rotation is fairly insignificant, so it can be skipped. Now although Sucrose is on paper significantly better than a C0 Nahida in terms of damage, Nahida is still fine to use, especially if she's C2. So let's go over Nefer's optimal rotation with Nahida. For this rotation, you don't have to worry that much about specific timings of ability usage like in the Sucrose rotation, because you don't have to swirl Hydro to proc instructors on Sucrose. The important things to focus on in the Nahida rotation are pressing the correct abilities in the right order and doing everything quickly and consistently for optimal DPS. So assuming you start with all elemental bursts up and at least 3 verdant dues, for the first rotation, start with Nahida's skill, then Columbina's skill and then burst, then swap to Llama and use her burst and hold skill, then back to Nahida for her burst, then the standard 6 enhanced charge attacks with animation cancels on Nefer using her burst after her 6 charge attack. Finally, assuming you played the rotation well, you have time to fit one Columbina charge attack at the end of the first rotation. After that, for the second rotation and all future rotations, you'll repeat the cycle of Llama burst and hold skill, then Columbina skill and burst, then Nahida burst and skill, skill, then lastly the standard Nefer combo with burst. The main thing that's different here compared to the first rotation is that in the first rotation, we go Columbina first, then Llama. But for the second and all future rotations, it goes Llama first and then Columbina. This is specifically ordered to ensure that all of Columbina's off-field Lunar Bloom damage from her skill gets buffed by Llama's burst quills. The other minor difference is that with Nahida generating dendro particles, Nefer can consistently use her burst every rotation. This means that you don't need to use Columbina's charge attack at all after the first rotation, where it is used only to fill time. If you happen to not get enough energy on Nefer to burst though, you have some extra time to fit Columbina's charge attack in. Now to go over the rotation again step by step. So to start off the first rotation, we start with Nahida's skill to apply dendro, then swap to Columbina and use her skill into burst, then swap to Llama, use her burst, into hold skill, then swap back to Nahida and use her burst, then we swap to Nefer and do her standard on-field combo, so skill, 3 charge attacks, skill, and another 3 charge attacks with some nice animation cancels, animation cancel the last one with her burst, and then on the first rotation specifically, we can end with a Columbina charge attack because we have the time for it, but it isn't that important so it can be skipped. Then on the second rotation onward, we can repeat the process of swap to Llama, use her burst into hold skill, swap to Columbina and use her skill into burst, swap to Nahida, use her burst into skill, and then swap to Nefer and do her standard combo, so skill, 3 charge attacks, skill, 3 charge attacks, and because you have a third dendro support in Nahida, you ideally have enough dendro particles to use her burst every rotation. So you end with the burst cancel, no need to Columbina charge attack, then we're back to Llama burst into hold skill, Columbina skill into burst, Nahida burst into skill, and then lastly the Nefer combo, and repeating the process. Again, unlike the Sucrose rotation where you have to swirl Hydro, with Nahida there's not really any specific timings you have to look out for. It's mainly press the correct abilities in the right order consistently, and inputting all the actions clean and fast. Now if you're starting with no energy like for Stygian Onslaught, one example you can do is the following. Start with Columbina's skill, then do some normal attacks to proc Favonius Codex, swap to Llama and press her skill, then swap to Nahida and do a skill and a normal attack, then swap to Nefer and just do one set of her charge attacks, so 3 of them. Afterwards, swap to Columbina and do some normal attacks to proc Favonius Codex again for extra energy. Then by this point, ideally you have everyone's burst up, so you can start with the normal rotation, just repeating the second rotation and onward rotation for Nefer Nahida teams, where you start with Llama burst into hold skill, then Columbina skill and burst, then Nahida's burst into skill, and then Nefer's standard combo. Nothing too fancy here, just make sure you have a lot of energy recharge on your supports. Lastly, I want to briefly cover the rotations of some other common Nefer team variations. If you have C2 Nilou, which gives 35% Hydro and Dendro Res Shred, she is a great final support option for Nefer as a 4-piece Instructor's holder and can be on par or better than C2 Nahida. Starting by applying Dendro with Nefer on the first rotation, you then use Columbina's skill and burst, then Llama's burst plus hold skill, adding a normal attack on the first rotation only to ensure Dendro is on the enemy, and then activate Nilou's Tranquility Aura to proc Instructors and her off-field Hydro application before doing the standard Nefer stuff. Now afterwards, there are 2 options you can take the rotation. You can use Nefer's burst at the end, or if it isn't up, use Columbina's charge attack to fill the time, or you can decide to not do that and instead just swap to Nilou, have her Hydro ranked react to re-proc 4-piece Instructors, fit in a Columbina charge attack if you're quick, then continue with your rotation. And from what I've seen and asked, both look to be viable rotation choices. Next, I know a lot of people don't like sustainless Nefer teams, so here's one example rotation with Kuki, who is a great support option who's cheap to build and can hold 4-piece Instructors. Her rotation logic is similar to Nilou's, where you can decide to swap back into her after Nefer to re-proc 4-piece Instructors for the team EM buff, or you can just fill the time with Nefer's burst or Columbina's charge attack. Other sustain options for Nefer include Ineffa, Linnea, and Jahoda, ideally Jahoda C6. Ineffa and Linnea are pretty self-explanatory rotations. For Jahoda, her kit is very awkward to use to ensure she absorbs Hydro, so the rotation I have shown may not be the most optimal, but it is what I tested to work consistently with her kit's requirements. Lastly, for those of you that don't have Columbina, you will generally use Aino instead, so here are some example Nefer rotations with Aino as the Hydro support, and either Nahida or Instructor's Kuki as the final support. The 2 main differences is that with Aino, you cannot hold skill on Llama like in Columbina teams because you have less verdant dues, so you always use tap skill on Llama. And because of rotation timing and Aino's inferior Hydro application compared to Columbina, when you animation cancel Nefer's charge attack with her burst, you want to do it after her 5th charge attack instead of her 6th because of the verdant due generation limitation. That's everything on how to play Nefer's most optimal rotations. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, consider leaving a like or subscribe to the channel for Genshin guide and analysis videos in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.